I knew something was wrong the moment she stepped into the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold, even though the house was warm. There was a stiffness in her shoulders, a tremor in her breath, and a look in her eyes that told me I wasn't going to like whatever came next. She hesitated for a second, as if rehearsing her lines, then said she needed emotional space. That was the phrase she used. Soft, polished, suspiciously prepared. She delivered it like someone reading off a script she'd memorized in the bathroom mirror. I stared at her, trying to figure out what the hell had shifted between yesterday's lazy kisses in the kitchen and this strange, distant stranger in front of me. She wouldn't look at me fully. Her gaze kept darting to her phone like she was expecting someone to break through the screen and rescue her from the conversation. When I stepped closer, she flinched. Not dramatically, just a subtle, almost imperceptible tightening, as if my presence complicated something she wasn't ready to confess. She said she felt overwhelmed. She said she needed to reconnect with herself. She said it wasn't about me. Every sentence was wrapped in warm, careful language, but none of it felt real. I could hear the hollowness beneath every syllable, the way her voice wavered like she was afraid the truth might slip through if she relaxed even a little. She rambled about wanting a weekend to herself before Thanksgiving, to clear her head, to reflect, to breathe. The whole speech sounded like it had been tailor-made to sound deep and mature. But her hands are what bothered me most. She kept them tight around her phone, gripping it so hard her knuckles paled. She held it against her hip like a secret she didn't want me getting too close to. Every time it buzzed, and it buzzed more times in that one conversation than it usually did in a full day. Her eyes flickered with something like panic. So, space, I finally said, not trusting my voice to hide the confusion twisting inside me. She nodded quickly, too quickly. Just a few days. I think it'll help me come back clearer, more grounded. Her words were clean and calm, but her body told another story. She shifted her weight, tugged at the hem of her sweater, avoided my eyes again. It was the kind of unease people get when they're about to lie or when they've already lied and are waiting to see if you'll catch on. Still, I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe she really was overwhelmed. Maybe work had gotten too heavy. Maybe the holiday stress was piling up. Maybe she truly needed air. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to be the kind of husband who didn't immediately spiral into suspicion. So I nodded, gave her the gentle smile she expected, and tried to swallow the bitterness forming at the back of my throat. She hugged me goodbye before she left for her space. Or at least, she tried. It was quick, hesitant, her body barely pressing against mine. Nothing like the warm, instinctive closeness she used to offer without thinking. The scent of her shampoo lingered, drawing up memories of nights when she curled against me, laughing into my chest, pulling me closer with a confidence that left no room for doubt. Now that same scent felt like a ghost drifting past me, something familiar that no longer belonged. When the door closed behind her, the silence felt too heavy. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the handle, wondering how something so small, a conversation, a choice of words, the way she held her phone, could crack open a quiet dread at the center of my chest. I didn't have proof. I didn't have facts. All I had was instinct. Something was off. She wasn't just overwhelmed. She was hiding. Her distance wasn't emotional. It was strategic. And as much as I tried to push aside the thought, there was a part of me, a cold, sharp part, that whispered a question I didn't want to hear. Space from what? Or space from who? I went to bed that night telling myself I was imagining things, that she loved me, that we were fine. But even as I closed my eyes, I could still picture her fingers tightening around her phone, like she was holding on to a different life, one she didn't want me to see. The house felt strangely quiet without her, almost too peaceful, like the air was pretending everything was normal. I tried distracting myself, cleaning a little, answering emails, reheating leftovers I barely tasted, but my mind kept drifting back to her expression the moment she'd said she needed space. It replayed in my head in slow motion, the soft voice, the tense shoulders, the way her thumb hovered over her phone even while she talked to me. I told myself to stop obsessing. People need air, they need breaks, they need space sometimes. But even as I tried to convince myself of that, my stomach twisted with a feeling I couldn't shake. That night, I was looking for an old recipe on the kitchen counter when her tablet lit up with a soft chime. It wasn't unusual. We shared devices, accounts, calendars, but she normally kept it on silent. The glow caught my eye, and before I even thought about it, my gaze flicked to the screen. A reservation confirmation, a hotel, a name I didn't recognize. At first I thought it was spam, but the moment I saw the check-in date, today, something inside me clicked in place with a cold, heavy certainty. The reservation was under a fake name, something generic and forgettable, but the contact number listed was hers, and the email the confirmation was forwarded to was the one she used for personal things she didn't want mixed with our joint account. My pulse thudded in my ears, not because I had proof of anything yet, but because this wasn't something overwhelmed, emotionally drained spouses did. This was something planned, private, hidden. I didn't open anything else. I didn't scroll or search or dig. I just stared at the tablet as the truth pressed against the back of my throat. She had said she needed space, and now she was in a hotel under a name that wasn't hers. After a long moment, I set the tablet down as gently as if it were a bomb, afraid the slightest wrong move would make everything explode. All I wanted was to understand, not accuse, not jump to conclusions. So I told myself there could be a dozen explanations. Maybe she wanted to treat herself anonymously. Maybe she wanted a weekend without being recognized by someone from work. Maybe this was some kind of self-care thing she didn't know how to explain. I knew even then that I didn't believe a single one of those excuses. Still, I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. So I spent the rest of the evening quietly collecting details. Subtle things I'd ignored before. The late nights finishing work. The phone she kept face down no matter where she set it. The new lingerie she bought but never wore around me. The sudden bursts of nervous energy when a message came in. The overly rehearsed smiles when I asked if everything was okay. Every piece seemed harmless alone. Together they formed a picture I didn't want to look at. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I kept replaying memories of us, the way she used to curl into me on the couch, the warmth of her palm against my chest when she wanted my attention, the silent moments when she'd look at me like I was home. The woman in those memories felt close enough to touch, but the woman who left that morning felt like someone else entirely. I woke early the next day, restless and hollow. I made coffee, but the scent turned my stomach. I paced the living room until I felt ridiculous. Finally, I sat on the couch and tried to reason with myself again. People make mistakes. People get overwhelmed. People retreat, even from the ones they love. But then I remembered the way she'd pulled back when I touched her. Not a big pull, just enough for my body to know something hers wasn't saying. I didn't want to be suspicious. I didn't want to be the jealous husband with paranoid theories. But the more I tried to silence my instincts, the louder they became. So I decided something quietly, internally, like a switch flipping. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Not without the truth. If I was wrong, I wanted to be wrong quietly, without damaging us. But if I was right, I needed to know how deep the damage went. I spent the rest of the day watching the clock, waiting for the excuses she'd text me later, the pre-planned reassurances, the little lies seasoned with just enough affection to distract me. And when those messages came, perfectly timed and perfectly polished, something inside me hardened. She was lying with too much ease, and I was done pretending not to notice. The decision to drive to the hotel didn't come from anger. It came from a quiet, heavy need to stop living in uncertainty. I woke up the next morning with that same tightness in my chest, the same uneasy energy crawling beneath my skin, and I knew I wouldn't get peace unless I saw the truth for myself. Not imagined it, not feared it, saw it. So I drove. The sky was gray with a thin chill. the kind that slides under your clothes and settles there. My hands gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary, and I kept replaying her words. I just need space. It's not about you. It's only for a few days. The memory felt like a bruise pressed over and over. When I pulled into the hotel parking lot, a part of me still hoped I'd find nothing. Maybe her car wouldn't be there. Maybe she really was just trying to escape stress. Maybe I would walk away relieved and embarrassed for doubting her. But her car was there, parked neatly between two trucks, unmistakable, familiar, hers in every sense. My heart thudded so hard it felt like a punch from the inside. I sat there in my own car, engine humming softly, staring at her license plate until the numbers blurred. This was the moment I'd tried so hard to avoid, the moment that stripped away every comforting lie I'd whispered to myself. I could have left right then. I could have turned the key, driven home, and waited for her return with the pretend calm of someone who believed her story. But something made me stay. Something made me look around the lot, scanning rows of vehicles I had no business paying attention to. And that's when I saw it. Another car. A car I knew just as well. My brother's. Before my mind could form thoughts, my body reacted. My breath caught. My fingers froze. My heart went cold in a way I didn't know the human body could manage. I blinked, hoping it was a trick of the light or a coincidence or anything other than the truth that hovered like a blade above my ribcage. But it was his plates, his stupid bumper sticker, his exact model and color. Two cars, side by side in the same hidden corner of a hotel parking lot. Hers and his. It was the kind of sight that doesn't just break you, it rearranges you. The betrayal didn't hit me in a burst of rage. It hit me slowly, creeping in like cold water rising inch by inch. Wife, brother, two people who were supposed to be safe, two people who were supposed to be mine, not in possession, but in loyalty. Two people I trusted with parts of myself I didn't show the world. I waited. I don't know for how long. Minutes, maybe. Or an hour. Time warped into something stale and heavy. I just sat there watching the hotel lobby doors like they were the gates to a truth I didn't want but couldn't avoid. Eventually, they stepped out. Her first. Then him. A step behind. Close enough that their arms brushed. She looked relaxed in a way she hadn't looked around me in weeks. Her hair was tied back in a loose, playful way she hadn't worn since before things between us changed. She was smiling. A soft, private smile I used to think was mine. My brother walked beside her with an easy confidence. Too close. Too familiar. And then it happened. She reached for him first, fingers brushing along his wrist, then gradually sliding down until their hands met. He didn't hesitate. He laced his fingers with hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. Hand in hand. My lungs stuttered. My skin prickled. My mouth went dry. Watching them felt like watching my life from the outside, like some cruel impersonation of intimacy I'd once believed in. My senses sharpened in a way that felt almost painful. Every small gesture between them, every stolen glance, every soft lean of her body toward his felt like a blade twisting deeper. And I didn't move. I didn't shout. I didn't burst out of the car demanding answers. Instead, I stayed perfectly still, my hands gripping the steering wheel as if letting go would shatter me. There was something strangely paralyzing about the truth when it finally arrives in undeniable form. It doesn't explode. It sinks. They walked to her car, laughing quietly. She nudged him with her shoulder. He touched her lower back, a touch both careful and intimate, guiding her toward the passenger side. I felt heat rise in my chest, not from desire, but from the echo of what used to be mine, what used to be real. As I watched them, one thought wound through my mind with slow, icy clarity. This wasn't emotional space. This was choreography. This was planned. I didn't follow them when they drove off. I didn't need to. I had seen enough. More than enough. The truth had made itself clear without words. But something else settled inside me that morning. Something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not sadness, not even heartbreak. A calm. A cold, calculating kind of calm. The kind that whispers, "Now you know. Now you can begin." Driving home after seeing them together felt like moving underwater. Every sound muffled, every breath thick, every thought drifting between disbelief and a strange, burning clarity that made the world feel sharper than it had any right to be. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly the leather creaked, and I remember staring at the road with the strange realization that something inside me had shifted, not cracked or shattered, but simply slid into a colder, sharper shape. By the time I reached our driveway, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not confront her yet, because confrontation meant emotion, and emotion would get in the way of the truth and the plan I knew I needed to build. When she texted later that evening, her message came wrapped in the usual sweetness she used whenever she wanted me to stop paying attention, and it made me read every word twice. She wrote, "I'm feeling a little better tonight. Just needed some quiet time to think. And I hope you understand that I really do love you, and I'm grateful you're giving me the space I asked for." The moment I read it, something darkened in my chest. I wrote back with a calmness that felt almost theatrical, telling her, "I understand completely, and I want you to take as much time as you need, because your peace matters to me, and I only want what helps you feel settled." As I sent it, I realized I wasn't lying. I genuinely wanted her to take all the time she needed, because every minute she spent wrapped in that fabricated little world with my brother was another minute she believed she was safe, another minute I could use. The next morning she sent another message, this time describing her self-care retreat, with a level of detail that might have been convincing if I hadn't already seen the truth. She wrote that she was journaling, meditating, walking by the water, sipping tea while reading a book she had been meaning to finish, and I could almost hear her voice delivering those words with that soft, fragile sincerity she used when she wanted to sound emotionally enlightened. I responded with gentle encouragement, typing, "I'm glad you're taking time for yourself, because you deserve it, and I hope it brings you everything you're searching for." Even as I wrote it, I felt a strange mixture of pain and power, because every word I sent gave her more confidence in her deception, and every word she replied with gave me more evidence of how easily she could lie. I spent that entire weekend gathering information with a quiet precision I didn't know I possessed. I opened our shared phone records without guilt, because guilt belonged to people who didn't have proof of betrayal. I scrolled through timestamps, cross-referenced locations, saved screenshots, and noted patterns, because patterns are the bones of truth. I watched her messages light up my phone with the warm tone of a woman who claimed she was healing, while in reality she was recovering from a night spent in a hotel with my brother. With every screenshot I saved, my shock dulled and transformed into something steadier, something that felt less like heartbreak and more like strategy. Throughout that weekend, I replayed the moment I had seen them together, not to torture myself, but to freeze it in my memory like a reference point for every choice I needed to make next. The image of her hand sliding into his, the easy confidence in his posture, the softness in her smile that she had not offered me in weeks. Those memories became fuel, sharpening my intentions until even my breathing felt deliberate. And yet, when she called me on Sunday evening, her voice was soft and warm, almost melting through the receiver as she said, "I feel so much clearer now, and I hope you weren't too lonely without me, because I hate the idea of you sitting there waiting while I sort out my thoughts." I let her talk without interrupting, listening to the careful composure of her tone, before I answered with equal warmth, saying, "I wasn't lonely at all, because I want you to take whatever time you need, and I want you to feel whole before you come home to me, since your happiness is more important than rushing anything." By the time we ended that call, I knew she believed every lie she told me, and I knew she believed every gentle reassurance I offered her. She thought she was ahead of me. She thought she was fooling me. She thought she was balancing two worlds effortlessly, one where she played the enlightened wife seeking healing, and another where she indulged in whatever twisted fantasy she had built with my brother. What she didn't know was that I had already stepped out of the role she assumed I would stay in. I wasn't the blind, patient husband anymore. I was the quiet observer she didn't notice watching. I was the man she believed she could fool, gathering the threads of her deception with careful, steady hands. And as I sat alone in our living room that night, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house, I realized that the calm settling over me wasn't numbness or denial. It was preparation. Because now that I had seen the truth, I wasn't waiting for her to come home so we could fix anything. I was waiting for her to come home so I could begin. The Monday after her self-care retreat felt different, not because of anything she did, but because of what I knew. Knowledge changes the texture of the world. It sharpens the air, deepens the shadows, and turns ordinary moments into pieces of a puzzle that suddenly makes sense. She walked through the door that morning with a soft smile that looked almost practiced, the kind of smile someone wears when they believe they have escaped suspicion, and she wrapped her arms around me in a way that was warm enough to seem genuine, yet loose enough to feel temporary. I held her, not because I wanted her closeness, but because I wanted her to believe she still had the comfort of my trust. And while my hands rested against her back, my eyes were already focused on the pieces of evidence I had yet to examine. She talked for a long time about her weekend, offering gentle, measured sentences full of introspection and emotional clarity, as if she had gone on some spiritual retreat instead of hiding in a hotel with my brother. She described reading by the window, journaling by candlelight, and reflecting on her life, and her tone carried an almost theatrical depth, as if she were auditioning for a role. At one point she said, "I feel like I finally reconnected with myself, and I hope you can feel the difference because I want us to move forward with more honesty and openness." And I remember staring at her with a level of calm she mistook for devotion, when in reality it was the heavy stillness of someone who had already stepped outside the illusion being sold to him. Later that day, while she showered, I continued gathering the threads of truth with the same quiet precision I had used all weekend. I opened our shared financial account, something I had rarely bothered to check before because I trusted her completely, and as the balance loaded, I felt the temperature in the room shift. There were withdrawals, large ones, frequent ones, moving into an account I didn't recognize. At first I thought they were personal splurges she had hidden out of embarrassment, but when I traced the routing numbers and bank names, a cold realization settled over me like a shadow stretching across the floor. The account didn't belong to her. It belonged to my brother. For a long moment, I simply stared at the screen, reading the numbers again and again as if repetition might change them. But nothing changed. The truth stayed exactly where it was, bare and unmistakable. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was transferring money to him. Not once, not twice, repeatedly, significant amounts, quietly, secretly, consistently. I didn't feel rage, not the explosive kind anyway. What I felt was deeper, slower, something that burned in a way that almost felt like clarity. Betrayal is one thing when it is emotional or physical, but betrayal that sinks its teeth into your stability, your security, your trust in the foundation of your life, feels different. It feels calculated. It feels planned. It feels like a partnership built in the dark. When she stepped out of the shower wrapped in a towel, steam curling around her like a fog masking the truth she believed she'd hidden well, I turned the phone toward her and said, with a voice steady enough to disguise the storm underneath it, "I noticed these transfers today, and I wanted to ask you about them before assuming anything." She froze, not dramatically, but with the subtle stiffness of someone whose body reacts before their mind finds the right lie. She hovered a moment, then said, "I've been helping him out a little because he asked me not to mention it, and I didn't want you to worry, since you already have so much on your plate, and I thought it would only stir things up between you two, and I figured it was harmless." Her explanation was long, deliberately so, a chain of excuses designed to keep me focused on her voice instead of the truth underneath it. She spoke with the tone of someone trying desperately to sound thoughtful, but her eyes flicked away too often and her hands fidgeted with the edge of the towel like she needed something to grip. I didn't argue with her. I didn't accuse her. I simply said, "I appreciate the honesty," and she visibly relaxed, believing she had reached the end of the interrogation. She even stepped closer, placing a hand on my chest with the soft, familiar touch she used whenever she wanted to smooth tension away. The irony almost made me laugh, but I wasn't finished. Later that night, after she fell asleep beside me with the peacefulness of someone who believed she had told just enough truth to survive, I dug deeper. Transactions, messages, hidden email folders, and what emerged wasn't a story of simple desperation. It was a pattern. My brother had been drowning in debt for months, and she had been moving money to him to keep him afloat. Not because she was kind, and not because she had been manipulated, but because they had been in contact far longer than I realized. They hadn't fallen into an affair. They had built one, quietly, carefully, strategically, and they had done it using my resources. The moment that realization settled over me, I felt something colder than fury. I felt purpose. Because now I understood the scope of their betrayal, and now I understood the difference between an affair born from impulse and one woven from intention. And in that understanding, my plan finally began to breathe. In the days that followed, something inside me shifted into a state of calm so controlled that even I barely recognized myself. It wasn't numbness, and it wasn't denial. It was a clarity that settled across my thoughts like frost forming quietly and methodically over a window pane, each layer sharpening the view rather than obscuring it. I woke every morning beside a woman who believed she had me wrapped in a cocoon of false comfort, and each time she kissed my cheek with the softness of someone convinced she had escaped suspicion, I felt the strange, steady strengthening of a resolve that no longer stemmed from emotion but from strategy. She thought she was playing the role of a wife returning from a weekend of soulful reflection, but I knew now she was returning from a weekend spent tangled in lies she didn't realize were already unraveling under her feet. It was on a Thursday afternoon that I made the first move. I left the house under the pretense of running errands, though the moment I pulled out of the driveway, I drove straight to the lawyer I had chosen after 2 nights of researching every detail I could find. His office was quiet, structured, and lined with thick books that gave the room a sense of gravity I found strangely comforting. When I sat across from him, he asked me, with a voice steady enough to feel like an anchor, "Tell me exactly what has been happening, and leave nothing out, because every detail matters when betrayal is woven through money and relationships." And so I told him everything, but not with frantic energy or emotional desperation. I spoke slowly, carefully, weaving the story with the same precision I had used to collect the evidence. I told him about her request for space, the hotel, my brother, the money transfers, the deception that had been layered so meticulously it almost felt insulting in its laziness once exposed. He listened without interruption, and when I finished, he leaned back with a thoughtful expression, steepling his fingers as he said, "You are not dealing with an impulsive affair. You are dealing with a coordinated breach of trust that extends into your financial stability. The good news is that this type of betrayal leaves a paper trail, and you have already begun collecting it. The next steps involve securing your assets before either of them realizes they are losing control, because once they are aware you know the truth, they may attempt to drain accounts, hide transfers, or manipulate access." I remember nodding slowly, absorbing every word, because this was not about vengeance fueled by rage. This was about reclaiming the stability they had tried to undermine and ensuring that the consequences of their choices met them with the weight they deserved. He outlined the strategy with the meticulous care of someone who had navigated this battlefield many times before. First, we would freeze the joint accounts, transferring my portion into a secured individual account to prevent any further siphoning. Second, we would document every withdrawal she had made toward my brother's debts, because every dollar she gave him under the guise of secrecy formed part of a legal pattern that strengthened my case. Third, we would prepare the divorce papers in advance but hold them until the exact moment they would have the greatest impact. And fourth, we would arrange the financial structure so that my brother's dependency on her illegal transfers collapsed at the same time the relationship did, leaving him exposed to the creditors he had been hiding from. When he finished, he looked at me with a steady seriousness and said, "You must not confront her before Thanksgiving. You must remain calm, affectionate even, because the power you hold right now, comes from her certainty that you are unaware. Once she feels secure, she will continue acting without caution, and that is where she will make mistakes. Your strength lies in silence until the moment you choose to speak. I remember taking a long breath, feeling the weight of what he was asking of me, but also feeling the strange sense that I was more capable of this than I ever would have believed. When I returned home that evening, she greeted me with that same soft warmth she had perfected over the years, her arms sliding around my waist as she said, "I missed you today, and I kept hoping you'd come back earlier, because everything feels different now in a good way." I held her with a calmness that surprised even me, replying, "I missed you too, and I'm glad things feel lighter for you, because I want us to move forward without anything weighing us down." She smiled against my chest, believing she had rebuilt our connection, while I stood there silently redefining what connection meant. In that moment, I understood the power of letting someone think they were winning when the ground beneath them had already begun to crack. Each night after that, while she slept peacefully in the comfort of a life she assumed was intact, I continued gathering evidence, screenshots, bank statements, messages she didn't bother hiding because she believed her spiritual retreat had dissolved my suspicions. Each morning, she served me practiced tenderness, unaware of the blueprint for her downfall forming quietly beside her. And by the time Thanksgiving approached, the plan was complete, the evidence secured, the strategy perfected, and the only thing left to do was smile beside her at the dinner table while holding the match that would ignite everything she thought she had so carefully protected. Thanksgiving morning arrived wrapped in the kind of bright, crisp air that usually carried a sense of comfort. Yet for me, it felt more like the quiet before a storm I had engineered with deliberate care. The house smelled of cinnamon, roasted herbs, and all the familiar warmth of tradition, but beneath it all was the steady hum of anticipation pulsing under my skin. She moved around the kitchen with an ease that would have fooled anyone who hadn't seen the truth behind her soft gestures, humming lightly as she basted the turkey and arranged dishes with a level of attention that suggested she wanted everything to appear perfect. When she glanced at me over her shoulder with a tender smile and said, "I'm really glad we're doing this together, because it feels like such a grounding moment for us after everything I've been sorting through." I matched her expression effortlessly and replied, "I'm glad too, because today feels like the beginning of something clear, and I want you to feel completely at peace while we celebrate with everyone who matters to us." Throughout the morning, she floated between rooms with a kind of serene confidence, unaware that every detail she smoothed, every dish she arranged, every familial gesture she prepared, would soon become the stage for the truth she never imagined would rise in front of her. I watched her carefully tuck her hair behind her ear while she set the table, and I found it remarkable that the same woman who had moved through a hotel lobby with my brother's hand in hers could stand in our home acting like a devoted wife hosting a holiday built on gratitude and family. She had no idea the gratitude I intended to express was not for her presence, but for the clarity she had unintentionally gifted me. My brother arrived early, as he always did, wearing a smile that tried too hard to look relaxed. He stepped into the entryway and greeted me with a warmth that would have convinced any outsider that we were close, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, the brief flash of nerves he attempted to bury under casual charm. He said, "Man, it's good to see you, and I'm really grateful you invited me, because I know things have been a little complicated lately, and I didn't want there to be any distance between us." His words were smooth, practiced, almost painfully ironic, and I placed a steady hand on his shoulder while answering, "There's no distance because today is about family, and I want you to feel welcome and comfortable." The look on his face softened with a kind of relief he didn't deserve, and he walked inside without realizing he was entering the very room where his secrets would soon be stripped bare. As the rest of the family arrived, parents, cousins, in-laws, all carrying dishes, wine bottles, and warm greetings, the energy in the house grew bustling and cheerful, creating the perfect camouflage for the tensions simmering just beneath the surface. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, offering hugs, complimenting outfits, laughing at light jokes, and pretending the world she had built in shadows wasn't waiting to collapse. My mother pulled me aside at one point, touched my arm with gentle affection, and said, "You look calmer these days, and I'm glad to see it, because the two of you have always had such a strong connection, and I've been praying things stay steady." I held her hand and replied, "Things are steady, and today will bring clarity to all of us." And though she didn't understand the depth of my words, she smiled with the kind of trust that reminded me why the truth needed to come out in the open. Dinner began with the usual warmth, passing dishes, exchanging stories, clinking glasses, and I played my part flawlessly, offering soft smiles, warm toasts, and attentive glances toward everyone at the table. She sat beside me with her hand resting lightly on my knee, a gesture that might have once stirred something tender in me, but now only reminded me of the contrast between her public affection and her private disloyalty. My brother sat across from us, clearly trying to maintain his composure, though every time our eyes met he looked away with forced nonchalance, as if he believed pretending everything was normal would make it true. When dessert was cleared and everyone settled into that comfortable post-meal lull, she leaned toward me with a gentle squeeze of my arm and whispered, "I think it would be sweet if you said something before we bring out the coffee, because people love hearing your toasts, and it would make this evening feel complete." Her voice carried nothing but sincerity, because she genuinely believed she was standing in a world she controlled, and I felt a slow, deliberate calm wash through me as I realized the moment had finally arrived. I stood, smoothing my shirt, and gave her a soft smile that made her relax into her chair with a contented sigh. I tapped my glass gently enough for the sound to draw attention without disrupting the atmosphere, and when the room fell quiet, I said, "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, because this year has been full of revelations, clarity, and lessons about trust, love, and the importance of truth." I paused, letting the weight of each word settle across the room, watching her expression shift slightly as if trying to decipher the undertone. My brother stiffened almost imperceptibly, his shoulders tightening and his eyes narrowing in the slightest twitch of anticipation. And as I looked around at the faces of everyone who mattered, I felt the calm certainty that the moment of unraveling was seconds away, that everything they believed remained hidden was about to rise into the light, and that the next breath I took would carry us all into the storm I had prepared with absolute precision. The moment I began speaking, the room settled into an attentive stillness, the kind that stretches just long enough for everyone to feel the significance of what is coming, without fully understanding why. I let my gaze move slowly across the table, lingering on each person with the deliberate calm of someone who has rehearsed the truth so thoroughly it has become armor. My wife sat closest to me, her expression soft and expectant, the faintest smile touching her lips because she believed I was about to deliver one of those heartfelt, sentimental speeches she loved to boast about. My brother, on the other hand, shifted in his seat with the uneasy energy of a man uncomfortably aware that his secrets were balanced on a thin thread, even though he kept forcing his features into a mask of relaxed amusement. I took a slow breath and said, "This year has been enlightening in ways I never anticipated, and I have found myself grateful not only for the obvious blessings, but for the truths that revealed themselves when I least expected them. I learned that sometimes seeking clarity doesn't require searching outward, but paying attention to what unfolds right in front of you." Her smile wavered for a fraction of a second, almost imperceptible to anyone who wasn't watching her as closely as I was, and she tilted her head in the way she did whenever she tried to interpret emotional nuance, unaware that the nuance this time was a blade gliding toward her. My brother swallowed hard, his jaw tightening as he shifted again, and my mother leaned forward with a gentle, curious expression as she asked, "Is everything all right, sweetheart? You sound so serious tonight." I gave her a reassuring nod and replied, "Everything is more than all right, because I have finally understood the importance of being honest with the people who matter most, and I believe it is impossible to celebrate gratitude while holding on to silence." My wife placed her hand lightly on my arm, her touch warm but trembling ever so slightly, and she whispered, "You don't have to carry heavy things tonight. This is supposed to be a peaceful dinner, and we can talk privately if something is bothering you." I turned to her with a calm smile and said, "I appreciate that, but some truths belong in the open, especially when those truths have affected every person at this table in one way or another." With that, I picked up the remote I had placed discreetly beside my plate earlier that evening and pressed the button that brought the living room television to life. Conversations quieted instantly as the screen flickered from its standby glow into the first slide of the presentation I had assembled with meticulous care over the past week. My wife's hand slipped from my arm as her face drained of color, and my brother's eyes widened in the kind of startled panic that only comes from recognizing a disaster too late to stop. The first image appeared, a time-stamped photo of her car parked beside my brother's at the hotel. I let the silence stretch, watching the shock ripple across the faces around the table. My father leaned forward with a stunned expression, murmuring, "Is that what I think it is?" And before anyone could ask for clarification, the next slide appeared. Camera footage from the hotel entrance showing the two of them walking out together, her head tilted toward him, his hand hovering at her back in a gesture far too intimate to be misinterpreted. My wife inhaled sharply and said, in a strained, trembling voice, "This isn't what it looks like, and I need you to let me explain before you jump to conclusions, because this is a misunderstanding, and I would never intentionally hurt you that way." Her words tumbled out desperately, carrying the frantic rhythm of someone trying to outrun a truth already catching up to her. My brother pushed back from the table slightly, rubbing his hands over his face as he muttered, "We shouldn't do this here, and we should talk privately like adults, because this is not something the whole family needs to sit through." But his request arrived too late, because the next slide displayed the account transfers. Every withdrawal she had made, every deposit into his account, every financial thread that connected their betrayal. Gasps echoed through the room. My mother covered her mouth with trembling hands as tears welled in her eyes. My father's voice cracked as he demanded, "How long has this been going on, and how did you both think you could hide something like this from your own family?" And her parents stared with a mix of disbelief and humiliation, their faces turning pale as the weight of the betrayal landed on them too. My wife reached for me with shaking fingers and said, "Please listen to me, because I didn't mean for things to get complicated, and I was trying to help him, and I was overwhelmed, and everything happened so fast, and I never wanted this to spiral into something that would damage our marriage." Her speech stumbled as though her voice were tripping over the truth, and my brother attempted to jump in with, "We were going to tell you eventually, and we never wanted money to become a problem, and you have to understand how much pressure I've been under." Their words overlapped, desperate, tangled, and heavy with excuses. I raised a hand gently, letting silence reclaim the table. And with that same steady clarity I had carried for weeks, I said, "I understand everything now, which is why the finances have been frozen. Every transfer has been documented, and the divorce papers—" I reached into the folder beside me and placed them calmly on the table. "Are ready." The room erupted, voices layered in shock, disbelief, anger, heartbreak. My wife stared at the papers with wide, hollow eyes, and my brother looked as though he had been struck. But even as the chaos swirled, I felt a strange and undeniable calm settle deeper inside me, because while they believed this was the final blow, they had no idea the second twist was already waiting. Even with the chaos swirling around the table like a storm ripping through a room that had been peaceful only minutes before, I remained anchored in a calm that felt almost detached, as if I were watching the unraveling from a distance rather than standing in the center of it. My wife kept trying to speak, her voice trembling and jumping between excuses, apologies, and half-formed explanations, while my brother looked as though he had been hollowed out, his face drained of whatever confidence he had arrived with earlier. The rest of our family looked back and forth between the two of them, as if trying to piece together how something so elaborate could have lived beneath the surface for so long without anyone noticing the cracks. Eventually, the noise became too overwhelming, and I stepped away from the table, moving toward the hallway with a composed expression that made several relatives quiet down instinctively. I knew the moment I walked away, he would follow me, and he did, almost tripping over his own footsteps as he rushed after me with a frantic urgency that betrayed everything he had been trying to hide. When the door closed behind us, muffling the chaos in the dining room, He exhaled in a long, shuddering breath and said, "Please, I need you to hear me out before you go through with anything irreversible, because I swear there are things you don't understand, things that will change the way you see all of this." He ran a hand through his hair with a gesture that looked frantic rather than casual, and he continued, "You're angry, and you have every right to be, but I need you to know that this wasn't what you think, and you need to understand that I never meant to fall into anything messy, because it wasn't supposed to be like this." His eyes darted around the hallway as though searching for an escape, but when none appeared, he leaned forward and said in a desperate rush, "The truth is that I didn't get involved with her because I loved her, and I didn't want a relationship with her, and I'm not the villain you think I am. I was drowning, and I needed help, and she offered it. But it wasn't just financial. She was supposed to convince you to divorce her, because she thought you'd be more generous if it came from her, rather than through the courts. After that, she was going to take her share, and we were going to figure out a way to settle my debts, because the creditors have been after me for months, and I didn't know what else to do." His voice cracked on the last words, not with emotion but with panic, the kind of panic that comes when a man realizes the safety net he thought he had built was nothing more than a frayed thread. I let him continue, because I wanted to hear every detail of the scheme he had tried to keep hidden behind his rehearsed half-truths. He swallowed hard and added, "She said she could push you toward separation, and she said she knew how to talk to you gently enough that you wouldn't suspect anything, and she said she had already gotten you to agree to distance in your relationship, and she believed she could guide you toward signing papers without a fight. I only agreed because I was desperate and terrified, and she made it sound like a plan that could save both of us, but I swear I didn't think it would go this far." His confession spilled out in a stream of words, each sentence weaving a picture more twisted than the last, and I watched him with a calm so steady it unnerved him. When he paused to breathe, I said in a level voice, "So you're telling me that you not only betrayed me as a brother, but you also conspired with my wife to manipulate me into losing half of everything I built, because the two of you decided that my life, my assets, and my trust were the easiest solution for the mess you created." He blinked rapidly, nodding and shaking his head in the same motion as he said, "Yes, no, I mean, yes, technically, but you have to understand that she pushed it, and I thought you would handle it better than most people because you're strong and you're stable and you always land on your feet, and I didn't think it would destroy you. She promised we wouldn't have to go this far, and I believed her, and I know now that it was stupid, but at the time it felt like the only winning move left." I let a moment of silence stretch between us, long enough for him to shift uncomfortably under the weight of it. Then I said, "The thing you don't understand is that nothing you just confessed is surprising to me, because I already knew. I knew the pattern, I knew the money trail, I knew the whispered conversations, and I knew the way the two of you had been plotting long before either of you realized I was 2 steps ahead of you. I didn't confront you because I wanted to see how far you would take the lie, and I waited to hear what you would offer me when you ran out of places to hide." He stared at me with a stunned expression, the kind that strips a man of whatever scraps of dignity he has left, and he whispered, "You knew everything. Before tonight?" I nodded slowly, letting the truth sink in as he leaned against the wall like the weight of his own failure had finally become too heavy to hold upright. His breathing faltered, his face crumpled, and I watched as he realized that every part of the plan he had relied on had not only collapsed, but had been dismantled with deliberate precision by the very person he had attempted to manipulate. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely steady as he said, "Then you understand that I never meant to hurt you the way this looks, and I didn't think we'd be standing here like this, and I swear I didn't expect any of it to blow up in front of the whole family." I stepped closer, meeting his gaze with the kind of unwavering calm that made him flinch, and I replied, "You didn't expect it because you assumed I would stay blind forever, but you forgot that the quietest person at the table is usually the one taking notes on everyone else." His shoulders slumped, his expression broke, and for the first time all evening he understood exactly what he had done, not just to me, but to himself. And as he stood there unraveling, I realized there was nothing left for me to say, because the truth had already done the work for me. When I stepped back into the dining room, the air was dense with confusion, tension, and the kind of stunned silence that settles over a family only when something unthinkable has just taken place. My wife sat rigid in her chair, her hands tightly clasped together as if she believed she could hold the pieces of her collapsing world in her palms if she only gripped hard enough. Her eyes darted toward me the moment I entered, filled with desperation and the faint spark of hope that I might sit beside her again, listen to her pleas, and somehow forgive her through some impossible emotional calculus. My family watched me with a mixture of worry, heartbreak, and quiet support, while her parents exchanged devastated glances that carried years of expectations shattering all at once. She rose from the table slowly, as if every movement required careful negotiation with her own trembling limbs, and she approached me with a voice that wavered so much it sounded like it was held together by unraveling threads. She said, "I know you're furious, and I know everything looks unforgivable, but I need you to hear me, not as a wife who made mistakes, but as someone who lost her way while trying to hold too many things at once. I never wanted to destroy us, and I never wanted to betray you in ways that would wound you this deeply, and I'm begging you to let me explain the parts you don't understand before you make a decision that ends everything we built together." Her words carried an almost theatrical emotional weight, as if she believed that pouring sincerity into each sentence could reverse the reality of what she had done. I looked at her with a calm so unshakable it made her flinch, and I said, "You had every opportunity to speak truthfully before today, and you had every chance to choose honesty over comfort, yet you chose silence, secrecy, and manipulation. There is nothing you can say now that would restore the trust you dismantled piece by piece, because trust is not rebuilt through desperation after being broken through intention. What you chose to do was not an accident, and what you chose to participate in was not a moment of weakness. It was a strategy. It was a plan. And it involved my brother, my resources, and the foundation of the life we shared." Her face crumpled, and she whispered, "I loved you. I still do. And I was overwhelmed. And I didn't know how to ask for help without disappointing you." She reached for my hand with a trembling movement, and I stepped back gently, not out of cruelty but out of certainty, because the space between us had already stretched beyond repair. My father stood then, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder, a quiet gesture that reminded me of every lesson he had ever taught me about strength, self-respect, and the importance of walking away from people who do not protect your heart. My brother stayed in the hallway for several minutes before finally returning, his face pale and hollowed out, as though he had aged years in the span of half an hour. He avoided everyone's eyes, sliding into a far corner of the room like he hoped the walls would absorb him. When my mother looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and sorrow, he whispered, "I didn't mean for everything to go this way, and I didn't know how to stop it once it started." But no one acknowledged his words, because some betrayals are too large to soften with apologies. I gathered the folder containing the divorce papers and said to the room, "There is nothing more that needs to be discussed tonight, because the truth has spoken for itself. I will not raise my voice. I will not debate. I will simply proceed with the steps already in motion, because continuing this charade would serve no one, and healing requires clarity, not negotiation." My wife took a step toward me again, tears streaming down her face in heavy, silent streaks, but her mother gently pulled her back, whispering something I couldn't hear but understood from the look in her eyes. Accountability begins with acceptance. I left the house shortly afterward, stepping outside into the cold November air that felt startlingly clean after the suffocating heaviness inside. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a message from my lawyer, who had been waiting for my signal. The message read, "Everything is filed. And one more thing. You should know that during the refinancing 3 years ago, she signed a waiver relinquishing her claim to the marital home without realizing the legal implications. The house is yours entirely. She has no legal entitlement to it." I stood there for a long moment, the cold air filling my lungs as I absorbed the final twist in a story already knotted with betrayal. It was unexpected, poetic in a way, and astonishingly final. Not only had their scheme failed, but the very foundation they attempted to dismantle had been secured in my favor before either of them even began weaving their lies. As I drove away, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't even feel the hollow ache I expected. What I felt was a calm settling over me like the quiet after a storm, the kind of quiet that marks the beginning of a life rebuilt rather than the end of one destroyed. Behind me, two people who had tried to manipulate my world were left to face each other in the ruins they created, and ahead of me stretched a road lined with possibilities untouched by their betrayal. I didn't look back, because everything worth salvaging was already moving forward with me.